growth in a cyclical sense rather than a linear sense. Maybe it's good to look at resources in the economy in a cyclical sense rather than a I take, I use, I dispose kind of way.
Ashley Bland, the founder and managing director of Constructive Energy, is an advisor to business and government on renewable energy and sustainable best practice. He is regarded as one of Australia's foremost experts in environmental management infrastructure.
And I think that, we're just sort of coming to grips with that as a society, that it's not a case that compromise means that you don't get what you want. It's actually compromise means that more people get more of what they want.
Ash has an enviable track record of carbon preservation, Aboriginal inclusion, and renewable energy construction. He has true passion, not only for the planet, but also for the people. This leads him to create pragmatic, sustainable solutions that thrive in the real world.
And there's this amazing thing about renewables. You often hear people say, oh, but the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. And I say, well, that's true, but when it does, it doesn't send an invoice.
When we're talking to environmentalists or the green lobby, often seen as zealots, radical, where are you sitting with that and how are you wrestling with that?
And so mostly for people who have bills around $1 million or more, we help them decarbonise their business and get on top of renewable energy.
Ash Bland, so good to have you here. You're one of my favourite people. We just had a great lunch out at Pepper Greens. Shout out to Pepper Greens in Berrima, by the way. Fantastic meal. Wagyu steak and a nice Shiraz. Could be a good conversation.
Well, Mark, can I just say it is such a pleasure to be here. I've likewise have an enormous amount of respect and admiration for you, and it's a great privilege to have a chat with you in this format. And thank you for a gorgeous lunch. I mean, how good was that?
That was great. Yeah, I don't like podcasting, but I love lunch.
That's what I was all about. Actually, I might go now if you don't mind.
No, it was great. I mean, you and I got to know each other working for Green Homes.
Yes.
Which has been a great journey. We've been doing that for a number of years.
Indeed.
And certainly in that environment, you are the Professor Green. Like there's so much that you know about this whole space, and it's been great to work with you and leveraging that expertise, and that brand's done really, really well.
Sure, yeah.
And a big chunk of that is the expertise that you've added. So it's been great to work with you.
I hope so. Yes, just trying to make a difference wherever you go in life. But yeah, it's a great idea whose time has come. I think that whole.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge brand. It's doing well, and shout out to Mick as well. So good to see you, Mick, and nice to have you. We're going to see the opening tomorrow of the new display home, so that'll be fun. In your bio, you talk very much about environmental responsibility, environmental sustainability, that whole ability to be able to shift people as far as understanding the environment. What do you mean by that?
Well, it probably helps to understand a bit of my background for that. So, I mean, ultimately, I'm a farm boy from regional Australia. I grew up on the top of the Great Dividing Range in a landscape where it snowed, 2 or 3 times a year. The school bus couldn't make it through the snow. And pretty quickly as a kid, I think growing up, I was probably lucky to come from a line of a family who've thought deeply about, I guess, existence. I mean, in all realms, but the physical environment and your spiritual, emotional well-being and what you do. And so I probably, looking back, had a different sort of childhood, roaming around the farm. And if in that era, I guess before smartphones and everything, I spent a lot of time on my own around the farm. And once you start to sort of look at nature and really take the time to understand what's going on, you start to see things at a process level and I guess a real deep level, and you see how ecosystems function. And, the first Australians were all over this, right? And that was part of your initiation. It was like, mate, your totem's this, go off, I'll see you in 12 months. Go and learn everything about the butterfly, the whatever. I'm not saying I had that, but I did have a close connection to the environment growing up. And when you do that, you see the impacts of human activities on that environment. And, part of the other side of me was like, this isn't fair because the environment has no voice. If you transgress against another human, even if you transgress against a pet, it'll bark at you or you'll get some feedback, We as humans can transgress against nature and there's no feedback. There's just consequences. And so I started to see that very early in my piece and going, I don't think the way we're operating is sustainable. in terms of the things that I value, the birds and the animals, the wildlife, the clean water, those natural processes. And I guess at some point, without necessarily consciously choosing it, but I took the view that would be the focus of my life, would be actually trying to connect people to the fact that we are part of nature. We are the ecosystem, and we are now the dominant force that shapes ecosystems on the planet. And, I've experimented over the years with various ways of connecting people to that. Maybe we'll delve into this in the course of the conversation, but I think that separation of us and humans from the environment has been at our peril, because actually, there's a lot that we can learn from observing nature. Like, nature doesn't have waste. Nature is efficient. Nature is effective. Nature, there's a lot of natural processes that we can learn from that have direct correlation to how we run our businesses and our lives. Absolutely. And all of that.
Yeah.
And that's really, no matter what I've done in life, whether I've been a musician and a photographer and an engineer, and I've done all sorts of interesting stuff, but it's always had that lens of like, how does this fit within, nature?
I love that. I did a zoology degree and even an environmental studies paper, mainly because it had high pass rates. I didn't have to work on Wednesday. But I did actually, I'm sort of an undercover environmentalist, I think.
Well, I think one of the pleasures about any sort of environmental study, it's a bit like humans. Like, you'll never know it all, right? Do you know what? There's a real loveliness around having a constant sense of inquiry and a constant sense of awe and things that you can learn throughout. It's a lifelong learning journey, anything in the environment space.
And the business environment's changing a lot, I think, from it's always been very hierarchical, industrial revolution, very sort of chunky 2x2 matrices and straight lines and hierarchical triangles and things. Yeah. And yet today, in a fast-moving environment, it's much more like an ecological system, much more around the environment and working with each other, and more of an ecosystem mindset.
Yes.
Rather than a structured. I think the biological terms are going to come back as far as describing how business work.
I think you're exactly right. And that's one of we talk about biomimicry, right? And in terms of individual products and things, I think that's a really tangible way of saying, well, how would nature, I hesitate to use the word nature in a way because it's kind of loaded, but let's just park that for the minute. How would nature do this? How would it function? And then if you look at business in the same way, I've often reflected that it has a lot of wisdom in it for us. For example, when you look at a forest system, for example, that has become simple and lacks complexity and has a simple structure. Let's go, for example, a system where you've got tall emergent trees like, a single species of eucalypt or whatever that sits up the top and then crowds out the sunlight for all of the plants underneath. You have a simple system with a lack of diversity. Then that becomes prone to interruption. Now, whether it's a cyclone or a disease or something, you've got a simple system and then it gets disrupted and then bang, there's all this incredible opportunity that arises as a result of that. And then you have all these different plants coming in and more animals come in because there's greater diversity, there's more resilience against shocks and all of that. And you look at that in terms of a business and the way perhaps Australian economy operates, where we're very happy to have, a few companies controlling so much of what we do, the big retailers and all that. And I often think that's a system that's vulnerable. And if we looked at it from an ecological point of view, we might say, let's not do that. Yeah. Let's encourage more diversity because we are a stronger system overall. It's just one example, I think, of where we can learn from nature and apply that to the way.
I like that. Like it's more variety, competition's healthy.
That's right.
More variables in the system.
In so many ways, Mark, one of the frustrations about being an environmentalist for the last 40-odd years has been that, it's like, oh my goodness, this is so obvious that the solutions are pointing in the same direction.
Yeah.
What is waste a good thing? Well, probably not, So now we're seeing circular economies, and there's all this buzzword around circular economy as if it's an amazing thing. It's like, well, the planet's been doing it for billions of years, We're just catching on, saying maybe it's good to have growth in a cyclical sense rather than a linear sense. Maybe it's good to look at resources in the economy in a cyclical sense rather than a I take, I use, I dispose kind of way. And hey presto, it's better on all sorts of levels, socially, emotionally, financially.
Lots to learn from that space for sure.
Lots to learn, yeah.
Can we, there's so much in this topic. Can we just, before we go into some of the detail, particularly around what you're doing now, when we're talking to environmentalists or the green lobby, often seen as zealots, radical, no sense of reality, damage to the economy, transition. There's a lot of things in that space. You seem to have a practical understanding of there's a lot of good things we could be doing from an environmental standpoint, but there's the practical realities of the economy and people. You've worked in the mining industry, and regional Australia. Where are you sitting with that, and how are you wrestling with that?
Oh, wow. I think my life has been about compromise in many ways, or what I've recognised is the value of compromise. And so whilst I think it's really important for society that we have divergence, I often think about a lot of things in terms of a bell curve, okay? So you've got, at the one end of the bell curve, you've got people who really love, I don't know, music, whatever it is, they're right into that. And then you have the kind of the majority, and then you have the people who could not give a stuff about music. It's like that kind of everywhere. And I think it's really important to listen to either ends of those bell curve, the people who are flat out right out this end and the people who are flat out right out this end.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's those people who move the dial with humanity, right? It's the people who take that stance and gradually, move us. But ultimately, the decision and the value is in the middle, not at the extremes, And I have seen the death of a lot of great ideas through the pursuit of perfection.
Yeah, right. So and the zealots to the Luddites.
Yeah, there's a practicality of it. And, I think back to
That's so true.
Even down to a really practical example in a farming kind of context was that I think I was about 14, and one day I decided that I'd go and spray the blackberries, And so I got myself up nice and early, and I walked down the paddock, and I got the tractor out and hooked up the spray unit and went down to the boughs and started filling it with water and grabbed out the pesticide. And my grandfather came down the hill and he said, "What are you up to, Ash?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to spray the blackberries, Jack." And he's like, "What the hell are you doing that for?" And I'm like, good. I thought he was going to be so proud of me, because I was a young fella showing initiative, getting out there to spray these, agricultural weeds. He said, "What the hell are you doing that for?" And I said, "What do you mean, like the blackberries?" And he said, "Well, it's still spring. The birds haven't nested yet." And I'm like, oh. And to me, that was a real epiphany on two levels. It's around that ecological awareness and observation and all of that. But secondly, about you can still control blackberries, but you can do it in a way that doesn't destroy the food source and the habitat for birds that need that, because the other part, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And it's kind of like that everywhere in my life. It's like, well, where can you find the middle ground here? Because, it's no good. There's no point sending everyone broke. There's no point dying as a martyr on a pyre or something for a principle if it doesn't move the dial for that bulk, bulk of humanity.
Yeah.
So, I see, I don't see that as a failure. I see that as that pragmatism or that compromise. I think there's this idea like, oh, well, we compromised, It's like, yeah, we compromised. Do you know what I mean? It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a celebration of what can be done if you take in diverse perspectives and then choose an outcome. Sometimes it's the least worst outcome for all those parties.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the best, but invariably it's a compromise that is possible and that will at least move the dial.
Yeah. That's life, isn't it, really?
100%.
In so many ways.
Yeah.
We're always looking for black, white answers. I think particularly in the modern environment where we're very much polarized in our thinking, everyone's saying black, white, yes, no, right, left. And yet ultimately most solutions have a level of compromise.
Absolutely. And everything is more connected and integrated than we realize.
Absolutely.
You know, and when you know, perhaps I should have said, you know, my training was as an engineer and ecologist. I did a Bachelor of Engineering in Natural Resources at UNE, which was a brilliant course in many ways before its time. And it meant that you could either be an engineer that could talk to environmentalists, or you could work in the environmental field and understand but actually be practical and pragmatic about it. And that's served me really, really well, because things are rarely black and white.
It's good to have someone, I think, in that space, because if you're tying yourself to trees or you're just ignoring the whole thing, there's something wrong. Like, I think in the middle, to be a conduit for the thinking of, okay, is there a better way to do this? Or can we do this in a way that actually is not going to have so much impact on community or the economy, or like, how do we transition in a way that kind of makes sense and looks after the planet as we go? That's a good thing.
Absolutely. And my experience is that there is always a better way. There is always a pathway which pays some respect and homage to the planet, as well as achieving the outcomes that humans need. And, you know, even in when I sort of cut my teeth in the mining industry in northwest Queensland, there are a couple of things that came through really clearly to me. One of which was specifically around environmental systems, which is that, you know, if you just stop buggering the joint up,
it goes a long way.
Just stop doing the stuff, you know, stop killing things, stop wrecking things, stop, you know, if you just remove that influence of humanity, nature can look after itself quite well, you know, and it might not always look like it to us, but actually, you know, it will begin its healing journey the day we stop. The day we get out, it will start, you know. All those functions are written into the way the universe works, right? You know, the other thing I learned up there was that if you meet people where they're at and you can show that you understand their world and there's some respect for their role in it, then all things are possible. You know, I often say, rarely is punching someone in the face a good way to start a conversation. You know, so when I started in the mines, you know, I learned how to drive a bulldozer. I went straight to the earth workers and said, "Can I get my dozer ticket, please?" You know, and talked to the dozer drivers, and they're like, I had long hair at that time, and they used to call me this long-haired hippie. Beep. Anyway, but I remember talking to those guys, going, "How cool is that dozer? That's fantastic," you know, like. And by the time I left the mine, I had one of the dozer drivers come up to me and said, "You're a bastard, Ash." I said, "Why is that, mate?" A bit harsh, you know, but why is that? He said, "Oh, mate," he said, "every time I drop my blade now, I'm thinking about the lizards and how I can do it different." And it's like, that was like kind of the best compliment I could get.
Absolutely.
Because now that dozer driver, when he went and did a borrow pit for the road, you need the road, you know, it's not, we're not going to not do the road, but he was able to do that excavation in a way that left the trees with hollows. He would just go around them.
Yeah.
You know, he would pre-strip and save the seed and the topsoil and all that, so that once the borrow pit was done, it was easy for nature to kind of come back. You know, there were such easy things that you could do, you know, that actually it wasn't a one, you know, you didn't have to take everything. That was just laziness, you know. And I think that, you know, we're just sort of coming to grips with that as a society, that that actually it's not a case it's not a case that compromise means that you don't get what you want. It's actually, compromise means that more people get more of what they want, and we haven't wrecked the planet in the process.
Absolutely. So some of us want to go to Mars, but I think we need to look after here while we're thinking about that.
Oh, don't start me. I mean, you know. Yeah.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Yeah.
We still have to look after this one.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't understand how we've structured our economy that one person can have that choice. You know?
That's a whole different conversation.
That's another conversation.
Another conversation. Look, I think there's a bit of a misnomer around the environmental movement, which is, we need to go back to, you know, wearing grass skirts and digging things out of the ground. There's actually an opportunity here with new technology to really embrace ways that are healthy for the environment, great for cultivation, like regenerative farming, drones that can actually detect weeds and laser rather than adding chemicals. I mean, there's so much fantastic technology going on. It's not just going backwards, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, and I think, you know, looking backwards is always important to learn.
Sure.
But you can't live there. You know what I mean? You're not going to go back. And indeed, I think sometimes in my time in the environmental restoration movement, doing tree planting and things, we would work for groups or organisations that would say, well, this particular plot of land was grassy box woodland or whatever rainforest it was, and we're going to reinstate that. It's like, well, actually, nature didn't specifically care about whether that was a grassy box woodland, and it's only that system because after the Ice Age over the last 20,000 years, all of the driving factors, most of which is underground, by the way, and, bacterial and fungal and all of that stuff has arrived at a grassy box woodland in that point in time. And then we would farm that for 200 years and then suddenly turn around and go, oh, we want a grassy box woodland back there. It's like, well, it took 20,000 years to make that. But what we can have is an environment that delivers clean water, clean air, food, fibre and stability and sequesters carbon and all of that. It just looks different. And that speaks to the value of elevating things like process over content. Do you know what I mean? So if you take the view that you want a specific solution, then you're almost automatically tied into dogma. If you take the view that you want functions, then that opens up creativity. And it's kind of long-winded way of answering your question, but basically it's sort of saying you can't look back, and it doesn't mean a sustainable future doesn't mean necessarily missing out on things that we had or going around in horses or whatever, but it does mean, in my view, actually respecting the fundamental processes that support all life on this planet. And if you take, and it's the same we've done with green homes, right? We don't teach people to build this house. We teach people to understand what passive solar design is. And similarly with the environment, we don't need to look back and say we need to recreate that ecosystem. We need to say, what are the processes that nature delivers that are really important to us, and how can my activities do that? And if you ask that question, then that applies whether you're building a 40-story skyscraper, whether you're farming, whatever you're doing in your life and business, there is room for environmental processes to be, respected and enrich what you're doing.
I like what you're saying around that's a process, thinking about the process. Because we're dealing with limited resources. I know technology has allowed us to use those more effectively, probably, over time. But we do need to really think about water and energy and the way that we do some of these fundamental processes.
Yes.
In a way that we're dealing with a limited resource.
Yeah, and I think now, this is part of the role of governments, right, is to kind of to step in and, in the not-for-profit sector, I guess, but to make that link because it all happens far away, right? I throw my rubbish away. Well, for somebody that's not away, for somebody that's here, I get my water, I turn on the tap, I do all this sort of, and I remember doing an exercise once for a corporate group. It was around Tree Day in Australia, and it was a corporate volunteering thing. And I remember doing an exercise with them and saying, we started actually by looking at a leaf, and I said, as you breathe out, you're feeding the leaf. As you breathe in, that oxygen is coming to you, to connect people to nature. And then I remember saying, look, so last week there was a butterfly that went extinct in Queensland. Can you please tell me how that affected you? And there was lots of kind of nervous shuttling. I said, come on, this is a species that's been on the planet for thousands, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and it's gone extinct. Please tell me how it's affected you. And they're like, I don't know. Well, it didn't.
Those butterflies?
Somebody had the courage to say, well, it didn't. And it's like, that's the problem.
Exactly.
And then there's this famous story that says, if you're flying to Europe and you're on you're on your Airbus or whatever, and at some point over the ocean, the captain comes on and says, oh, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to alarm you, but we've just lost a rivet from the left-hand wing. How would you feel about that? And suddenly we would have a connection and a concern about that. But we've become so dislocated from our impacts on the environment. And the great promise, and I think the advantage of some of the legislation and corporate cultures and shareholders and all that coming in is to say, no, you you have an impact and you need to be responsible for that, and indeed we need to organise our economies so that the money flows in ways that reflect what our true impact actually is, because we have, put so many things into the external basket. That's always been somebody else's problem down the track or somewhere else. And I think that's what has to stop. But it's not as if we go backwards when that stops, there's a lot of fear around like, oh, but what if I have to pay for everything? It's like, well, actually you'll be more efficient.
Yeah. And you might have to. That's right. And what's the price if you don't?
Yeah.
So that mindset shift of responsibility, caring for the environment,
absolutely,
stewardship of creation, whatever way you want to phrase it. It's an important part of what we do, I think, as a species.
Well, you've got to ask what it's all for at the end of the day,
Sure.
and the moment you have children, I know lots of people who are nervous about having kids, because of, the consequences of not actually considering the planet and each other. And it's a bit of an epic fail.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah, we've got declining populations in Western society. Absolutely. It's a real
for a reason.
Really, yeah, absolutely. A really interesting topic. Can I come to, because it's such a broad topic, the piece that you're commercially involved with your giving advice and the consultancy that you have, Constructive Building. Tell us about that entity and what you're doing and who you're serving in that space.
Oh, yeah. Well, Constructive Energy was born out of, I guess, the fact that I'd had that engineering and ecological kind of background. So, and in a previous organisation called Skillset, it had got sort of $8.5 million of federal funding back in 2009-10 to build a sort of green skills and sustainability education facility. And after that, the CEO of that organisation, Ben Barden, who is an extraordinary human and a really great leader, he had said to me, well, now that the centre is built, why don't you start a line of business in environment? And so I started that up, and that had two elements to it. There was natural landscapes and built environment. And then at one point in my life where I thought, yeah, I think I'll have a crack at running my own business. There's a time in life that
what
you can do
thinking?
that. Well, my wife, my wife asked that question.
We've all done it before and gone, whoa, this is a little harder than we thought.
A bit of a leap of faith. But I sort of took that energy and that built environment piece forward and really focused on renewables as a way of, looking around thinking, well, actually decarbonising our energy networks is really important. And so that business is really focused around that. And I think at the time in particular, but it remains true, there's lots of people out there who are going, I know I've got to do something with renewables, but I don't know what. Energy is important. It's often the second highest cost for a lot of organisations after staffing. It's important, but it's not core business, right? It's not their home turf. So I would step in and help with their strategic planning and reviews and all of that. And for me, that was one of the interesting things around that. And I guess this goes back to my leadership journey. It's sort of starting by saying, well, first of all, we have to decide how we're going to decide.
Yeah.
You'd see with councils and corporates going,
ask the right
where's he going
question
with this?
That's so true. Ask the right question.
How are we going to decide? And that means finding out, well, what are your strategic goals? What are you trying to achieve? And critically, what are your values? Because if your decisions aren't aligned in your values, they're not sustainable. And so we would spend some time up front doing that. And then it'd be like, right, well, this is how you engage with renewables or energy or whatever. And once you've done that work up front, it makes the decision, the millions of decisions, thousands you've got to make down the track, it makes them easy. So Constructive Energy really started in that space. And I've got to say that's the stuff I love. I really love being in rooms of people and helping build consensus and that kind of strategic piece.
Yeah.
But then because you've built a relationship of trust, often people would be saying, well, can you help us do it? It's like, oh, okay. So we started a project delivery kind of arm as well. And so mostly for people who have bills around $1 million or more, we help them decarbonise their business and get on top of renewable energy. And there's this amazing thing about renewables. You often hear people say, oh, but the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. And I say, well, that's true, but when it does, it doesn't send an invoice. You know, so
and there are batteries now, right?
and there's batteries now, there's storage options. So your marginal renewable energy is everywhere and the marginal cost of production is zero. And those are the two most disruptive kind of elements, which we've kind of forgotten as we desperately try and ram an infinitely scalable kind of technology into a centralized model.
You impacted my thinking on this when you gave a presentation at Green Homes one time, where you showed a graph of investment return and cost of delivery for renewables.
Yeah.
And it had crossed over to the extent where private investors could get a reasonable return even without government help on small scale renewable projects. I thought, well, that's the answer. That if we've crossed over from that, then this is inevitable. And why would we not be doing more of it?
Yeah. It's so
Am I very pragmatic?
No, you're so right. And hearing you say that
just changed my mind.
Hearing you say that is like both really inspiring and just kills me inside because I sort of think, wouldn't it be great if everybody was doing this because of the values associated with it?
Yeah.
But the reality is it's just a smart economic
both,
choice.
it helps.
And you got both now.
Yeah,
and some people are involved specifically because of the financials. It's like, okay, but I think, the work.
But that's the vehicle you need though, right? Doesn't matter how, if like the values are there, the drive is there, if the economics aren't there, like it almost doesn't matter how much the government throw at it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really that's probably true. And there's the role of government to get things kick-started.
Sure. Yeah,
but
transition,
at a certain point,
100%.
pull out.
The economic viability has to be there for it to be sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's right.
No pun intended.
It's interesting. True. It's interesting, when you look at the discussion as it's occurred in Australia around renewables, which has been so fractious and so ideologically driven. But in the meantime, people have just got on with it, right? The mums and dads out there have voted with their wallets and they've now privately subsidised public infrastructure to the extent that today, about 45 probably % of the entire east of Australia would have been run renewably.
Yeah.
And the biggest single chunk of that would have been rooftop solar, the excess from people's rooftop solar.
Yeah.
It's already running the smelters and things. So, private people will move. And then in the corporate space, there's plenty of businesses out there that go, hang on, when I've got solar on my roof, I'm not buying someone else's electricity. Yeah, it's that simple. 27% IRR, job done, And so
and that's the main thing you're focusing on from a commercial perspective is the energy efficiency and renewables?
Well, it varies for people depending on that process that we've gone through, as I say. But mostly the best thing you can do is stop buying electricity from someone else.
Yeah, make your own.
Make your own.
Why would you not do that?
And then you're just playing with the technological solution and your economic appetite. Really, it's just finding a mix in there.
And you're doing that on larger scale too with communities and local government.
Yes,
the idea of working with local government gives me the shivers a little bit because it seems to attract a level of bureaucracy, but I'm sure there's lots of great people in the middle of that who kind of get this transition.
Well, it's funny you should say that because, I call it, I call it energy literacy and in the community it's actually really low. And so the first thing you have to do with a group of councillors is increase their energy literacy because until they can make a decision with confidence, like if they don't know, they can't make a decision with confidence, right? So we always take them through how does the network work? How does the billing work? What's the context for this decision? And once you go through that process, you end up, it's a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, but if you don't have that knowledge, then you're in the realm of trust and news and faith and all that. It's hard to make a decision and then you tend to be tribal in your thinking.
Yeah.
So, it was interesting.
Yes. That's very true, actually.
I presented this to Parliamentary Friends of Climate Action back earlier in the year and I started with a whiteboard and started with the energy network in Australia, which, gas started in the capital cities in the 1850s, but it was 1886 the first electrical network was created in Australia in Tamworth. And you sort of draw that up and how the regions developed and the distribution network. And then we find coal and the state government goes, yeah, well, like all of that sort of information is actually really important. Understanding how your bill works, understanding how the energy market works and what the job of a retailer is, understanding the regulatory context. Once you know all of that, then you get why we're where we're at, and you get why it makes sense to be on the path that we're on around, 100% renewables. If you don't know that, it's going to be hard. You'll be like, why are we doing this? It's ideological.
Yeah. And I think people are asking that question, not necessarily getting a clear answer, because with the climate change, the whole debate seems to be very dogma driven and almost with religious fervor, where if you're a scientist, you will not get funding unless you sign up to it's going to be the end of the world if we know it, unless we do something. Downside of that, where there's not a vigorous debate on where are we genuinely at, what portion of that is man-made, and what can we physically do to change that, and are we applying technology in a way that makes sense to drive change and thinking? I just don't think we have that debate. It's just like a one-sided argument.
I think you're right. To some extent, it's complicated. We are selective in where we apply science, right? If I go to a doctor and the doctor says, "Man, you've got heart issues. Here's a drug that's been through a heap of trials. We think you should try it." Do I say to the doctor, "Oh, my body's always been changing. It's still changing." Do you know what I mean? Do I say no, I trust that there's a whole scientific endeavour behind what that doctor has said. And I go, yeah. And yet when a climate scientist says, no, I'm pretty sure that this is going on, I'm pretty sure we go, why do you reckon that? You're ideological.
Who's funding your
Who's
research?
funding you? So we're very selective where we choose to apply that lens. And I think, the reality is,
I might say the same about some of the chemicals we get given by doctors as well.
Absolutely. And that's the problem, is that none of this is clear, as we said at the beginning, that it's murky, but I think going back to the bell curve again, there's, by some reckonings, about 9% of people who will just never be on board with the science of climate change. Who just, for whatever reason, they're flat earthers, whatever it is, they're just never going to buy it. And on the other end, there's the zealots who are going, "Oh my God, the sky's falling and we're doomed." And to some extent now, we need to stop listening to both of those sides and actually just get on with the
pragmatic
solutions.
Yeah, which is why I like your approach of yes, we need to change, but we need to look at the consequences and the transition.
Yeah.
I think that does make a lot of sense. And again, it's the only sustainable, because we could theoretically absolutely wreck economies on a philosophy that says it's going to be the end of the world if we don't.
Yeah, and it's not just economies, Mark. We talk about the economy as if it's this precious, amazing thing that must be obeyed at all costs, but it's like, what's the economy for? The economy is to serve people. And more importantly, we can wreck people's lives with this if we do it wrong.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
And I look at that out in the regions, and, the renewable energy zones, the way they've been set up in Australia at the moment, it was a very, very obvious way of fixing the problem by saying, oh, well, here's some network, here's some renewable resources, why don't we hook those up, But what didn't happen was people to have a socioeconomic plan around that. And what hasn't happened is adequate thinking into the way that would affect the people in that environment. Hey, presto, you're suddenly getting this real backlash in those rural
communities.
Particularly in the region, and rightly so.
You can understand that.
Rightly so. These, and it was interesting because I had some involvement in the early days of the establishment of those renewable energy zones, and we're sort of saying, you guys are using the language saying this is the modern day equivalent of a coal-fired power plant, right? So when I'm on a header in Narromine or on a tractor in whatever, or going to my dentist in Bathurst, when I hear renewable energy zone, most people are thinking, great, EVs, cheaper power, maybe some better services or whatever. When you hear modern equivalent of a coal-fired power plant, you just think, well, they just want to keep the lights on in Sydney. And so there's an exploitative kind of component. And combine that with the fact that we've had years and years of indoctrination really about the rights of individuals, but without necessarily that collective responsibility. Do you know what I mean? What I mean by that is, like, we had a power line come across our farm when I was still in, must have been primary school, early high school. One of those massive big steel truncheons came across our farm. Forever changed our landscape, arguably wrecked our view down the valley, meant that we couldn't crop dust. I remember at the time, Dad and my Uncle Quentin weren't happy about it.
Sure.
And they can't it be somewhere else? But ultimately it was like, well, if the people out west want power and, the people now, as it turns out, the people out west are providing power to Sydney. There was a sense that you had to give a bit for the benefit of all. We've been through 40 years of economic individualist rationalism.
Not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard, And so we've lost a narrative around, why are we doing this? What is this renewable thing all about?
Yeah.
And, you go to China where they have installed more renewable capacity in May than Australia has since Federation. Do you know what I mean? They are going absolutely.
Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. Go and check
in
it.
1 month.
Yeah, in 1 month. So
That is wild.
And they are on to
the advantages of a totalitarian regime.
Well, what they understand though, Mark, is if you want to be a competitive nation, how will it be for China in 10 years' time when all of their renewable kit's paid off and the wind's blowing? So they can run their factories for free.
Yeah, and cheap power from an economic perspective, going back to the environment, to the economy,
100%,
is a massive driver of national wealth.
Which is my point, to say the environmental path and the economic path are one and the same. Like what we've been able to do over the last century or so is ignore the costs and imagine that they weren't there and push that down to future generations or someone else. If you don't do that, then the economic path and the environmental path are the same thing. And so this is what's happening now. We're saying
really interesting,
renewables as a way of generating energy is good because we want to decarbonise our economy, but it's also good because it saves waste. At the moment,
which everyone agrees with, I think. In their sane moments, that's not like you're looking after the planet, you're reducing waste. That's a good thing.
If you started from scratch now and said, and we need to provide energy, and somebody said, well, okay, I'm going to stick up a wind turbine or a solar panel and create energy where you need it. And the other one said, no, don't do that. Like 1,000 kilometres away, I've got a pot of rock. I'm going to dig that up. We'll have to pay to dig it up and we'll kill a few people in the process, but don't worry about that. And then I'm going to burn it. 2/3 of the energy will go up the smokestack, but don't worry. And then I'm going to stick it in these massive power lines and then I'm going to transport it 1,000 kilometres a year. By the time you get to use it, about 10% of that energy will be like, we'd go, what? Like that's the dumbest idea of all,
Talking about the dumb idea and that thinking, where are you on nuclear? Because the reason I ask is I'm just loving the more extreme green people who, when I was involved in the environmental movement, that's what everyone was doing, was the anti-nuclear and fluoride in water and everything. That was kind of the thing. And then the planet's getting very, very cold and then it's overpopulating, neither of which turned out to be true. But there was this whole zealot movement, anti-nuclear, and yet my understanding is that there's actually a good usage case for a nuclear alternative. It takes longer to build, it lasts a lot longer, less waste. Some of the transmission argument I think is really interesting as far as using existing infrastructure rather than building new. What's your take on that?
Well, I'll just deal with the transmission thing now. It's full with renewables now. So when you get this idea to say, we'll just pop something there, it's not actually necessarily true. And also when it comes to electrifying the rest of the network, it's not just about replacing coal-fired power plants. It's about getting energy to the end user when they need it. But, that's probably a broader conversation. Look, I think there are really some compelling reasons to consider nuclear power, and I know that it works very effectively in other countries.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things that once you understand, I think lead you to the position that says just not in Australia now. One of which is the market function. So, there's a reason the coal-fired power plants are shutting down, one of which is just they're old and falling apart and intermittent, and it's really annoying trying to run a grid with something that just is like driving down the highway and your car suddenly stalling all the time. Like we can't have that. the other thing, is that you've got a source of energy that just goes in this band like this all the time, and suddenly you're getting more and more of your lunch eaten by renewables that come into that market. So for a point of the day, you just can't sell. And so, when it comes to nuclear in Australia, you would have to radically change the way the market functions. And the only people talking about nuclear in Australia were politicians, wealthy industrialists, or disaffected rural community members.
And me.
Well, maybe. I'm not sure what you're saying. But, nobody in the energy field was going, geez, we need a nuclear reactor. Okay. And that was nothing to do with the technology. It was more to do with the type of energy that's generated. Somewhere over there, it's that constant source of energy, which we just don't need. Our market is not set up for that.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you the investment risk and the implications in the market function. If somebody proposed the equivalent of a nuclear power plant in the Australian Stock Exchange, it would not be off the front page of the Australian and Sky News and everything all the time. We'd be going, oh, you cannot do that to the market, But that's actually the equivalent of what's happening in the energy market space with nuclear.
Yeah.
So park that. The only way it would work, and as a bank, who's going to fund something when you don't know what your price is for energy when you build the thing?
Government funded for sure.
It would have to be government. Yeah. And so then you've got to say, well, if you're going to socialise energy, if you're going to spend taxpayers' monies doing this, then what else could we use that taxpayer money for?
For sure.
When actually the market is showing that it's willing to do it just with renewables because it's cheaper and better. So, there's all of that in the mix. But
the only thing in its and I don't understand the market, which is why you're here, why we're asking these questions. But from an outside perspective, when I saw the comparison of numbers, they didn't even make sense because a renewable might be 10, 20 years, whereas 60 to 80 years or more for a nuclear, and yet they weren't taking into account the fact that it's 3 times you've had to now have to reconstruct an entire solar farm or wind farm a couple of times to be able to get the equivalent. And they weren't really comparing apples with apples from a purely cost perspective.
I think that's true to some extent.
Just to sort of garner their argument, I think.
Yeah.
And from a political...
And that comes back to what you were saying before. Unfortunately, we've got, the 9%ers at each end or whatever it is, now with social media, they can... we just end up with this really polarised debate rather than actually.
Yeah.
So look, to round it up, I think my view is that we should actually peel the lid off the nuclear discussion in Australia at a legislative sense. One of the things that is true is that we can't build a road in 10 years in Australia. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's true.
Need I say anything?
I love the on the M5, they got this new overpass that they built.
Yeah.
On time, on budget. And they're using a new technology that actually the whole thing just grows over time, doesn't interact with the traffic. Here's a company that is on time, on budget, using new technology and less disruption. Let them build everything else in the country. I don't know who they are, but they should be building everything.
Probably.
Because everything else is 100 million overdue and 3 years late and everything. I don't know who these people are. Let's get them to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So accepting that somebody like that could come into the mix, and that's arguable with a new technology. I think we probably should look at the legislative framework and all that. And my personal view is that actually, if you want a nuclear industry in Australia, let's talk about bringing back the waste from the uranium that we export to the world. We have geologically stable, landscapes and climate. Sure. So I'm not averse to nuclear per se.
Have the debate.
Have the debate.
Lost the ability to have the conversation.
Discussion. Yep. And clear the pathway so that it might be the case in 20 years' time where actually it's there is technology around for climate reasons or whatever. We do need this or not, but there'd be no problem with actually, starting to have the conversation around how you would enable it if it's necessary in the future.
Got it.
It's not now. Sure. It's just not now. Okay. We have better ways of doing it.
Politics is obviously a big part of this because of the enormity of the transition and the need for subsidies and a bunch of other things. And it's become a political football, I think, to a degree, or was at the last election.
Yeah.
The Greens, can I ask you about the Greens? Because some of the things they stand for from an environmental perspective, I'm thinking are great. And then they have a whole bunch of other things that are just, depending on your political perspective, a little bit in la-la land. And they paid a price at the last election, I think partly because of that. Do you think that because they've become a multi-issue party, they've lost some of the traction as far as driving this agenda or holding the government accountable for some environmental honesty?
Yeah, I've thought a bit about this, and perhaps this is, coming back to where we started around pragmatism. And, I always thought it was a great shame back in the, Rudd Gillard Rudd era when that, the Greens took a really hardline stance against that trading scheme at the time. And I look back now and I think, yeah, that was death by perfection, because once you've got a system in and it's bedded down and you can improve it.
Sure.
But it's in, and then now
80% is enough sometimes.
Sometimes that's right.
Yeah.
And so I am so glad we have the Greens. I'm so glad we've had over the period of time, people able to bring that perspective in and talk about moral courage and what's right, and talk about, what the economy is for. And, I think that resonates with an increasing proportion of our population as time goes on, because, arguably the Greens have stood for a more equitable, just economy, if you like, that delivers for people who are left behind in a kind of neoliberal, the economy at any costs kind of approach.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad they exist and they have persecuted that argument. Equally, I'm really glad that you've got the Liberals and the small business lobby groups and all those kind of guys as well. And back to the where we started this conversation, you need those
and that's what democracy should be about. An ability to engage with different ideas and respect each other. And
look, do you know what? I think actually in terms of politics, the right answer for Australia would be a multi-party cabinet. I'm not scared of minority government. I don't think that that's bad. I think it's probably more likely to say it's a balanced government or a representative government, because the job of those MPs is to represent their electorate, not the jersey that they're wearing. You know what I mean? And it's always confused me as a kid. I think by the time you hit 12 or 13, you go, tell me again. So the education minister has never had anything to do with education. Sorry, the environment minister is do you know what I mean?
Sure.
The fact that we put people in, and it's that argument of process versus content, isn't it? Arguably, they're meant to trust the departments and all of that, but unfortunately, I don't know. In the age of social media and the contested landscape that we've got now, I actually think it's time for a big review of all that, because I think right around the world, democracy is really under threat. It's
very polarised. We have in New Zealand, being from Kiwiland, mixed member proportional representation.
Yeah.
Which is if you get 5% of the vote, you get some seats in Parliament. So about half the politicians in Parliament are voted for specifically by person, and the other half come with each of the individual parties.
Yeah, right.
It's a circus. I quite like the idea of diversity. I think that's a good thing. But the practical realities of that can be a bit wild.
Why are we in such a hurry, Mark?
Have you watched New Zealand Parliament? It's quite entertaining.
I haven't, but I'm thinking about. Well, look, this is a broader. I didn't realise we'd go here in this discussion, but it's a broader philosophical context, because I look at, again, getting back to First Nations. Okay, so we have this concept of an elder, which doesn't necessarily mean you're grey beard. It means that you have gone through a process of law and understanding and initiations, and you get to you're growing. You've grown in wisdom to the extent that people go, that person can now be an elder. So only elders get to make decisions that can affect the mob, right? What have we got in the West? Well, if you get enough Facebook likes, if you're rich enough, suddenly you get a seat at the table. That's our decision making. Yeah. And so that leads to vested self-interests, short-term thinking, all of that kind of stuff. All of that, So to some extent, what might be missing in New Zealand then perhaps is either the patience or the process. There's something around the process that says ultimately we have got to land this, we've got to decide, and we've got to move.
Yeah.
There might be some sort of failure there more than the fact that you've got diverse perspectives.
Sure. Like in a business context, clarity of vision and a common set of values would actually crystallize that diversity.
Do you know what? You might have an opinion on this too, because I looked at Malcolm Turnbull's leadership style, and I think for me, I was lucky enough to be chosen for the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation program in 2011, and that was transformative for me. I mean, it was unbelievable experience for all sorts of reasons, where I really started to get interested in leadership and leadership styles, and I have no doubt that that's made me more successful in so many ways. But through that lens, I was watching Malcolm Turnbull, and I was thinking, you have a really great leadership style for the boardroom and for corporates, and that just didn't translate into politics.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was I actually thought he was going to be good because he was a fiscal conservative and a social progressive.
Yes.
I wouldn't agree with a lot of those policies, but for Australia, I reckon that's probably a reasonable balance. But he inherited a difficult place with a lot of compromises and had to keep a lot of people spinning. But for me, the mistake he made was not making an absolute decision on stuff and being willing to lose his seat based on a set of values. No, this is what I stand for. If you don't like it, then find someone else. Like there's a point and a time where you come to that. I think if Malcolm had made that decision and just gone, no, these are my non-negotiables, you might have done it right.
I agree. But and to get back to the New Zealand example perhaps too, it's less then about the people and more about the process, and so, at that point in time, because of the toxic nature of politics, social media and all that kind of stuff, what is ultimately, I think I'd love to think that Malcolm's style is the correct one and was the right one for Australia, but not in that
Who'd be a politician?
Do you know what I mean? Who would take that?
Who would do that? It's just a tough gig. Talking tough gigs, we're obviously talking to a lot of business leaders here. Like what's coming down the pipeline as far as politics, because there's legislation coming.
Yeah.
We know consumers have moved. This is not a fringe thing anymore. This is front and center in a lot of people's decision-making process. What are the things you think are going to impact businesses over the next 5-10 years?
I think some sort of price on carbon, even in Australia, I think it's such a political
coming.
It's a hot topic, but I think globally the pressure for that, effectively there's a kind of de facto one now. I'm working with cotton farmers and industry right across the board who are decarbonising because it makes fiscal sense. Oh, and by the way, I can export into Europe. Their future. So there's a lot of global pressures that are acting on Australia now that will increasingly.
Are we behind the eight ball globally?
Yes and no. I think the no is in some ways more good luck than good management, because people have got on with it, and because we're creative and progressive, we get on with it kind of bunch. We're actually not as far as behind as we kind of could be. But I think those global factors will continue to push. The climate has changed, is changing, is increasingly costly to run as an economy. And I think that gets harder and harder to ignore. So people's lived experience of the environment is now so aligned with what scientists have been saying for 40 years that they're increasingly not listening to the 9%ers. So, that social drive, as you say, is here to stay.
Mainstream now.
It's mainstream now.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a growing number of good stories out there that show that it's not, unfortunately we had to be environmentally friendly, so now we went broke. I think there'll be more and more stories saying, hey, guess what? We reduced our impact on the planet and now we're doing better. So I think that will be a major driver. Like there'll be a sort of positive pull. But I don't think you can escape some of the importance of the legislative pressure as well. And I remember going to a behaviour change conference years ago and hearing from a lady who was involved in road safety in Australia back in seatbelts, which would have been, I think it's the 70s, early 70s. And, she said they tried all sorts of stuff. They tried to say, all these positive education campaigns and by the way, you could die if you don't do this. And nothing worked until they made it law and enforced it.
Right.
And I think you'll find the same here. And I think, things like, finally we're in a position now where a government has the courage and imprimatur to do things like efficiency standards, which actually just protect people against their own stupidity. You know what I mean? I think those things are good.
Yeah.
I think the thresholds for mandatory reporting are going to come down. And
they are. I think the carbon footprint's 200 million next year and 100 million the year after.
Correct. Yeah.
Revenues. Then that's kind of starting to come into my land with the entrepreneurs that I deal with. We're all wrestling with it.
I'm really seeing it. And of course now,
not easy to do.
No.
Like a lot of people are going like, how the heck are we going to do this?
Yeah.
But that means they're going to be innovative and they'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, there's people who will always go in the short term for the cheap available solution. Well, not cheap, probably the most expensive available solution in the short term, and then they'll get smarter at it. So the initial thing will be the larger corporations turning around to the little guys and going, show me how you're carbon neutral. And the little guys going, I don't know.
That's happening now.
It's happening right now. I'm seeing it all the time.
And I think a lot of companies are trying to find the difference between what do I have to do to be compliant? I just need to tick the box. So my daughter, Peter Bilton, she has an ESG consulting company and she helps people work the way through this, the reporting, auditing, some of the requirements you need to do. She's also helps people to become B Corp, which is big in the US, not so big here, but it's a recognizable stamp for environmental and social responsibility that people recognize, because a lot of consumers are driven as well. So people are trying to go, what do I have to do to be compliant? Is there some cost saving in here if I'm energy efficient? Usually yes, if you think about it. And then the third thing is, are the consumers of my product or service taking into account my environmental credentials as far as that choice is concerned? So I think there's those three kind of areas, but more and more consumers are actually driving the decision to purchase based on environmental criteria.
Absolutely. I think given the choice, it's not at any cost for a lot of people. Some people don't care. For a lot of people, they want to, but find the price prohibitive, and other people are just going to do it regardless, right?
Yep.
But the B Corp thing is a fantastic example, and you're seeing more and more of that, where the staff within the organisation feel better because their organisation is making positive impact.
It's an employment brand as well, isn't it?
It's an employment brand too, yeah, as well as a consumer-facing one. And I think it's moved from, it's going to be more and more mainstream. At the moment, it's kind of a point of difference, but. I just want to dwell again on that idea that, we have to do this and there's a cost. And as from you talking with Mick and Green Homes, it's like, well, if you think about it up front, green home shouldn't cost any more than a normal home.
Yep.
And actually an energy efficient retrofit on a house or a new home will mean that you don't pay anything like the bills, like you're saving money and all. And
Absolutely.
I think we need to look for those opportunities elsewhere.
We do.
Equally, in this transition, and I think this is an important role for government, it would be a perverse outcome if the big companies are turning around to their little companies saying, show me how so all of a sudden we've got a mum and dad supplier for whom supplying to a big company was their life, and now suddenly they don't know how to do this. They're flat out trying to keep their kids in school.
Compliance
and so we're
impulse.
going to send them broke to save the planet? Well, I don't think so. I think we need to have services that speak to those people and go, are you getting pressure from the big guys?
Yeah.
Let us help, because there'll be things that company can do as well that will help make their manufacturing leaner, better, But they probably
with
need a
database
hand.
and AI, and you can do estimates and do a whole bunch of things.
My goodness.
That's a whole different world.
Oh, look, I'd love to talk more about AI and that impact more broadly on the society. One of the things I've observed from my playing with it is that actually AI is an environmentalist. Like, it's really interesting the number of times you put into an idea and it'll come back, and you've got to be sustainable. Do you know what I mean?
Right. You're just going,
I often
yes, I do.
find...
By the way, AI, you're using more energy than anyone else on the planet right now.
Yes, but those guys are onto it, and I heard
they're building nuclear to drive it.
Yeah. I look, see, that's interesting in itself. I mean, I know Amazon Web Services are, pretty sure they're 100% renewable. But in itself, that's kind of like, in a way, I think that's not enough. And the first thing is like, how do we use less? How do we be more efficient? And I just think about, we are still not necessarily prepared to make compromise either.
Yep. Bitcoin mining and AI.
Bitcoin mining? I mean, please,
I love Bitcoin. It's fantastic.
Oh my goodness.
Awesome. You should get into it. You should get into it about 10 years ago.
Anything that shows the stupidity of humans, at times just to completely invent something.
Right. You and I should talk about that another day because that's a whole different topic. That's a great topic. I need to get a crypto person in here to have a chat about that because I found it fascinating for a number of years.
It is fascinating.
And my next guest is going to be an AI person after you. So
great.
Yeah. So we've got some interesting people coming.
Good.
Back to leaders. What else do you think that your average business leader should be mindful of given the fact the environment's changing in this space? Energy efficiency, consumer awareness, some compliance.
Circular economy is
What's that?
is
Explain
another big one. So that I mentioned before that the idea that we just take something, we use it and we chuck it away, and the inherent inefficiencies in that model. That does not happen in nature. Everything gets cycled. All of the nutrient, water, carbon cycles exist. And it's the cycling that allows the sustainable growth. Things keep growing, but within the growth, there's all these little cycles. And I think that's a useful model to look at our economies, whether they're industrial or service or whatever components.
Fashion industry, which was my game for a long time.
100%.
The numbers are just, the waste is, you can't imagine it.
It's breathtaking, isn't it?
It is.
So I think we're going to be increasingly looking at ways that disrupt that, and hopefully we'll do so on the basis of, instead of having a cost to get rid of a waste, you have a revenue from providing somebody else with a resource.
Right.
And that's where industrial symbiosis, if you like, or circular economy, and that's
back to the ecosystem.
That's
thinking,
where that works really. And I had a little experience of that. At one point, I was the inland facilitator for the EPA Industrial Ecology Program, and we had some great wins out of that. Like a company that was dumping 3,000 tons of highly rich sludge into the tip, which stunk and was a carbon bomb for years to come. And I was able to help them slightly tweak a process that occurred in that factory, send it to an organics waste manufacturing, and now turn that into compost. So they saved themselves a healthy chunk of money from tip fees. We lost, the carbon emissions to the atmosphere, and we've provided a product which is better for people's gardens.
Fantastic.
It's more and more of that, and where you can find those win-win scenarios
and there's a lot of potential in that space, do you think?
Enormous potential in that space. It's certainly geographically bound, and my experience is in a lot of areas, in particular regional Australia, where people are resource limited and constrained and all of that, there's a lot of that just organically happening. One of the problems that Australia has is logistics, right?
Sure. Big space.
It's a big challenge because we want a one size fits all from Cairns to Devonport. But actually, I think we're going to be faced with a reality that we need to pull in our circle of influence and our distribution and start. And that will be a resilience measure as well.
I like that. You've done a bit of that, haven't you, with the local governments as far as small power stations, small renewable power stations closer to
that's right.
Local community?
And again, it's an efficiency thing. Like, why would I buy energy from 1,000 kilometres away when it fell on my roof? Why would I import water from that dam and that pipeline, all that, when it fell on my roof? Why? So wherever you can do that, you're actually gaining efficiency. And I think things like hydrogen, bioenergy, those kind of things will actually work at a patch scale. And in a way, that's we need to adjust our thinking around that, because we constantly look for simplified solutions rather than.
So we need brave, innovative councils. There's not too many of those around.
There are some though. There's some great.
We need that. We need the people who will drive the thinking, show the practical reality, so that people can go, "Oh, it worked over there. Why can't we do it here?"
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, okay. There's so much happening here. Can I think that's the environmental conversation. Well, one of the things we do here is also talk about lead well and live well. You've got 1,000 things going on. You've all sorts of opportunities to speak and to influence and to consult into the into this space. You're a busy man. You've got a wonderful family. You've built your own home recently, which is passive. How do you manage all that? Do you have any sort of disciplines in your life or the ways you sort of manage those competing priorities?
Yeah, that's a really important discussion, isn't it? The short answer is yes, but is I have, fallen off the rails at times because I have not given sufficient weight to the live well piece.
Yeah.
And I think we often position ourselves in service of communities and others, and at the peril of ourselves.
Yeah.
And my saying at the moment is that when you jump on a plane and they go through the safety induction thing, they talk about, the mask falling.
Yeah.
Fit your own mask first. There's a reason they say that,
Yeah.
And I've ignored that. And what I've learnt most recently is that actually filling your own cup first is really important in whatever way
Absolutely true.
that is for you.
Yeah.
And then you actually have more energy to give to people. You have more capacity to listen. You have, more capacity to respond rather than react. Your brain, everything works better. For me, a big part of my wellness regime is food and movement. So you've got to be eating good food.
Does your environmental thinking influence your nutrition?
Absolutely.
Okay. In what way?
It must drive my long-suffering wife and others. It must drive them mad because, if you put environmental thinking into one word, it would be think. Like, just consider. So when I'm in the whatever shop I'm in, I'm thinking about the packaging that something's in, where it's from, the production chain. Now, I happen to know that. Most people don't, but I'm always thinking about that. But if you were to simplify it, it's just less packaged goods. The closer it was grown to where you were, the better. If your grandmother recognised it, it's probably worth eating.
Yeah. Does it look like food?
Does it look like food? Yeah. We cook a lot ourselves.
You like the regenerative farming practice?
Oh yeah, I think there's an uncomfortable truth behind some of this stuff though, in that if we wanted to sustain the sort of diet we have where chicken is a flavour, not an animal, and you can expect to eat it 7 days a week, twice a week, then there is no other way to do that other than industrial agriculture and facilities with millions of chooks in them that have a really crap life, In the absence of a discussion to go, maybe one chook a week was enough for a family. In the absence of that, then we're always going to be forced into industrial forms of agriculture, I think, because there's and I'm not undermining the value of regenerative agriculture at all.
Yeah.
But you talk to my dad who went organic in the 90s before it was trendy, and he will say, this is great, but it won't feed the world. Won't for the entire world, on the diet that we've currently got.
It's a challenge, isn't it? Because then you're changing mindset and thinking and lifestyle and a whole bunch of things.
Or you're putting markets in and you're actually valuing again. You're actually valuing
choice.
It, and there's this whole thing around that, which I guess we could delve into as well. Saying at the moment, the environmental damage or the social damage or what it is subsidised. And we're not actually paying the true cost.
That is so true. I think particularly in the US, the way that things are just industrialized off the charts, it's a bit wild, and then all subsidized to make it work. It's not even viable for people to choose another alternative because you don't get subsidized.
That's right.
We went to Helen and I went to a YPO event that Harris Farm ran. One of the brothers, the Harris Farm brothers, ran, and he had a couple of regenerative farmers there. Fascinating, but marginal.
Yeah.
Like just the returns. We buy regenerative food direct from a farm. So they have a store, but it's basically field to plate, and it tastes different. You don't need as much, and it's actually better for the planet. It was when I first really had a look at that side of things. It was the first model I'd seen that not only used less carbon but actually contributed back.
Yeah,
like it has a positive impact.
Yeah.
Well, why aren't we doing more of this?
Well, it's really interesting. I tried a little while ago to find out how much food came into Bathurst. It seemed like a really simple question. It's like, well, how much do we buy?
I love the fact that you're an environmentalist living in Bathurst, which is, race capital of the world.
Yeah, well, that's kind of true. I
I
mean,
use some biofuel. There's a little bit of biofuel in that mix.
well, actually, V8s have been offsetting for years
Even
now.
the F1s are hybrids, man. Come on.
Well, won't it be great when we can go and watch an electric race, because they'll just be faster and better, Mark? I mean, come on, get on board, brother.
I'm not quite ready for that. I've got Dr. Tom Gann as a guest on the podcast, so I think by the time this one comes out, it's been out. He's great. He's EV City.
See?
He just knows everything about that. He's a fascinating guy.
Well, if you stood at the top of the Mount Panorama racetrack,
Yes.
You can look over a beautiful view over Bathurst. And I think about that saying, well, actually, we could feed the entire population of Bathurst forever just from the country that I can see. And but our diets would be different. You know what I mean? And when it came to actually finding out what food fluxes went in and out of town, I just couldn't find out, because now it's all tied up in commercial confidence between the major chains. And, back in the 60s we would have known, right? But now, it's much harder. Anyway, look, I guess the bottom line was, this is in response to that question of kind of self-care and living well. And I think there's something really lovely about cooking your own meals, and it's like you can always say you don't have time, but actually it's a really lovely ritual. It's really nice to be teaching your kids how to cook. For me, when so much of my day is esoteric and spreadsheets and phone calls and whatever, if the kids said, "What did you do, Dad?" I'd be going, "Well, I talked, whereas I can get home, get some ingredients out of the fridge. I mean, I'm so lucky because Dad drops a box of organic veg off every week, but I can take it out of the fridge. I can cook something. I create. It's a creative process, which I love. You get instant feedback. It's like, oh, nice meal or not, and then it's done. So it's a really lovely element in the day in itself, which I enjoy.
Yeah, a meal at the table with a family.
Yeah,
it's a good thing.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah.
To get to the other part of your question around movement, or for me, I'm a big fan of yoga and meditation, and now I start every day with a meditation. And you can get so, honestly, it becomes so loaded, and people think you're, levitating on the floor like a lotus, and oming and whatever. Yeah. Yes, Jules comes out. Ash, get off the ceiling. Come down here again. No, it's not quite that. But it's just taking those opportunities to still my mind. I find is really actually.
You find that centers you
100%. And I do it often during the day. It's one of the things that I find really interesting. I used to be trying to fill every minute of the day. Like if the kids were due, or if there was a meeting at 2:00, I'd turn up at 1:59. Now I'm much more inclined to turn up at 1:55. Take a moment in the car and just have a few breaths, meditate, calm, set my intention for the meeting. And I found actually I'm more productive since doing that.
So I don't have mindfulness.
I guess that's it. I don't know, what would you label it however you like, but that for me is just consciously slowing down to speed up almost. It's actually slowing down to do more. And the other thing is, I think there's something in, whether it's Pilates or yoga, there's something really good about core strength and flexibility. And I think it's one of those classic mind-body things. If you're flexible and strong in your body, you're probably flexible and strong in your mind. And those, to me, are two really important words for leadership in a corporate space.
Yeah, I think so. And often, thank you for sharing that too, by the way. Like I think a lot of leaders wrestle with that because they're passionate. They feel like a lot of responsibility. They can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without trying. And there's a price you pay for that in your relationships and your own where you're at. I think looking after number one is not a selfish thing. It actually allows you to serve others and just wide space, eat well, sleep well, exercise well, with body, soul, and spirit. On the spirit side, do you have any spiritual practice or anything in your world around that?
Look, absolutely. I mean, I think the yoga for me is mind, body, and spirit. Yep. And, there's an acknowledgement for me that there is a spiritual element to life. And I've come to, it's interesting growing up in a sort of Christian context and, doing the youth group thing and all of that, and then falling out of love with church, and seeing hypocrisy here and there, and then sort of coming back to faith later in life, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So in that journey, I think I've had enough experiences that I cannot explain. And for me, that's I'm a scientist at heart. I'm a rational kind of dude, but I recognize that there's this whole other part of existence, and dealing with quantum physics pulls some of that out. Dealing with Eastern religions or Christianity, they all kind of talk to this. Well, there's some stuff we just don't know. And finally in my life, I'm at peace with that, and I don't have to know the answer, but I know that life works better for me when I take consideration of that. And so for me, that is about having that strong sense of ethics and values and purpose. I think that's really important.
Right.
I think there's something really nice, whether you call it prayer or meditation or whatever, but there's something really nice and effective about intention and saying, how do I turn up to this? What is my intention for the day, the meeting, the space, the whatever, my family, how do I want to be? And then I think there's definite value in saying, I'm open. I don't know, guide me, protect me, take me in, that kind of acknowledgement, I think, is ultimately a healthy and helpful position to take, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's part of the human existence and to be on a spiritual journey, exploring those things, I think is healthy.
Yeah, for me, I get a lot of that by being in nature, by being surrounded by the bush.
Yeah, because you walk a lot, don't you? You walk
I
lot,
do.
tramp and do all that.
Yeah, and that to me,
it's a good place to be.
Well, that's where I find my solace. If that's kind of my church in a way.
Yep.
And the teachings are all around, in that environment as well.
Totally. I love it. And what's next for you?
Well, there's some really exciting things happening on the work front. There's some really great stuff happening with Green Homes, and Mick, who I know has been on the show. I love working with him and the team. And there's a really clear agenda there to help as many people as possible lower their bills and emissions and all that. So really exciting stuff in that space.
Because we've got the electrification
program.
Project. That's going to be massive.
Yeah, and that will improve a lot of people's lives, And then there's the constructive energy piece, which again, there's more. There's a lot of interest now. People are seeing the reality of what's happening out there. So there's a lot of interest, and for me personally, it's just actually classic business growth stuff. Like, where do we go here? How do I structure? Is this where I want it to be? Like, how do I manage growth? What sort of clients do we do? So you constantly.
We'll have a chat after this around that.
I'd love that, Mark. Yes, as I say, I've got great respect for you in that regard. So, so there will be that, and I think, in terms of what it's all for, I'm so fortunate at the moment. All of my parents are alive and well, and my in-laws and my kids are at the most beautiful stage of life. I've got a beautiful wife. I've got this fantastic life, and I think my epiphany recently has been, don't miss that. Actually creating the space and making sure that when that changes, as it will, I'm not one of those people going, geez, I wish I spent more, So finding that balance for me is really important. And that gets back to my daily mindfulness and spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Saying what's important, allowing space, what's important, what do I show up for, who am I serving, So the next for me, I've got those clear kind of business things to do.
Yeah.
And I've got those lifestyle objectives. But for me, what's next is actually more a process than an outcome.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I
enjoy
that journey and bring in that daily practice, I'm going to be fine. Like I am fine. It's a joy to be alive, and it's a journey of discovery, which I'm looking forward to and completely up for.
Awesome, Ash. It's a joy to have you here today. Thank you so much for coming all the way down and joining us here in the Southern Highlands. It's been a pleasure. I love hanging out with you anyway, but it's just really great to hear some more of your story today. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Mark. I have really enjoyed this. It's not often that you actually get time to sit down and actually someone says, what do you reckon? What do you think? And delve into it. So I've got a lot out of it too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, God bless you, my friend.
Take care.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us at the Lead Well, Live Well vodcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you want to know more about what we're all about, you can find us at leadwell.co.uk. livewell.com.au.